The year was 1979. America's muscle car era was on life support. Gas prices had climbed, insurance companies punished anything with real horsepower, new emissions laws had turned once feared V8s into shadows of their former selves, engines that had roared with over 400 horsepower just a few years earlier were now struggling to reach half that. Across Detroit, engineers weren't asking how to build the fastest engine anymore. They were asking how to keep performance alive. But what almost nobody knows is that Pontiac had one last gamble. One last attempt to prove a V8 didn't have to be big to be exciting. It wouldn't rely on cubic inches, it would rely on boost. At first, it looked brilliant. The engine would sit there and idle with surprising smoothness. It cruised quietly through traffic. It passed emissions tests that had buried so many legendary V8s. Owners thought Pontiac had somehow beaten the system. Then someone buried the throttle, and everything changed. Because hidden beneath that calm personality was an engine living dangerously close to its limits. One long pull at full boost, one tank of questionable fuel, one moment of detonation, and suddenly bearings were hammered, pistons cracked, head gaskets surrendered, and expensive repair bills followed. Most people remember the turbo Trans Am. Very few understand the engine that powered it. And once you see what Pontiac's engineers were trying to accomplish, you might start looking at this forgotten turbocharged V8 very differently. By the end of the 1970s, Pontiac faced a problem unlike anything in its history. The legendary 400 and 455 cubic inch V8s were disappearing. High-compression muscle engines couldn't survive increasingly strict federal emission standards, and fuel economy regulations were forcing every manufacturer to rethink performance. The easy solution would have been to build smaller engines and accept defeat. Pontiac refused. Instead, its engineering team asked a dangerous question. What if a small V8 could make big block torque using a turbocharger? Today, that idea sounds ordinary. Turbocharged engines are everywhere. But in 1979, it was almost radical. American manufacturers were experimenting with turbocharged 4-cylinders and V6, yet the idea of putting a production turbocharger on a V8 seemed almost reckless. The foundation was Pontiac's 301 cubic inch V8. On paper, it didn't sound impressive. Its displacement measured 301 cubic inches, or 4.9 liters. Bore measured exactly 4.00 inches, while stroke came in at a short 3.00 inches. The low-deck architecture made the engine significantly lighter than Pontiac's older 400 and 455 V8s. Weight savings had become more important than brute strength. That lightweight design came with compromises. The cylinder walls were thinner, the crankshaft used fewer counterweights, the heads featured relatively small valves designed to improve low-speed efficiency rather than maximum airflow. Nearly every design decision favored economy instead of racing performance. In other words, the 301 wasn't born to become a performance engine. Pontiac had to transform it, and that's exactly what they tried to do. Engineers didn't simply bolt on a turbocharger and hope for the best. They redesigned critical components to survive boost. The turbo version received a reinforced block, stronger internals, a high-pressure 60 psi oil pump, a fully baffled oil pan, a specific Rochester quadrajet carburetor calibrated for boost, and an AI Research Garrett TBO 305 turbocharger feeding compressed air into the V8. Factory boost was limited to roughly 9 pounds through a wastegate. Compression dropped to around 7.6-1, so the engine could tolerate forced induction without constant detonation. The numbers suddenly looked respectable. For 1980, Pontiac rated the turbo 301 at 210 horsepower and 345 pound-feet of torque. Those numbers may not sound extraordinary today, but remember the era. Many larger V8s had already fallen below 200 horsepower. The little turbocharged Pontiac was producing impressive low-end torque during one of the darkest years in American performance history. Even more impressive was how civilized it felt. Start the engine on a cold morning, and it settled into a surprisingly smooth idle. There was no wild camshaft lope, no shaking body panels, no clouds of unburned fuel pouring from the exhaust. It behaved like a normal commuter. You could let it idle while waiting outside a grocery store, sit in traffic with the air conditioning running, cruise effortlessly down the highway. It almost convinced people this was just another quiet emissions-era V8, but appearances were deceiving. Because hidden under that shaker hood was one of the most complicated Pontiac engines ever sold to the public. To protect itself from destructive knock, Pontiac equipped the Turbo 301 with an electronic spark control system using a knock sensor. The instant detonation appeared. Ignition timing was pulled back automatically. At the time, that was incredibly advanced technology for an American production V8. It was brilliant engineering. It was also a warning. If an engine needs electronics constantly listening for detonation, you already know detonation is never very far away. And that was the beginning of the real problem. On gentle throttle, everything stayed under control. Oil pressure remained healthy. Exhaust temperatures stayed manageable. The turbocharger built only modest boost, and the engine felt relaxed. Floor the accelerator, however. The entire personality changed. Boost climbed rapidly. Cylinder pressure skyrocketed. Combustion temperatures surged. Every piston, bearing, connecting rod, and gasket suddenly experienced forces they had never been designed to endure when the original 301 had been created as an economy engine. Pontiac's engineers had strengthened almost everything they could, but they couldn't change the engine's DNA. And once owners started demanding maximum performance, the little turbocharged V8 began fighting for its life. The idea sounded almost perfect. Take a small displacement V8, add just enough boost to make up for the horsepower lost to emissions regulations. Keep fuel economy respectable, let the turbo do the heavy lifting whenever the driver wanted performance. On paper, Pontiac had done exactly that. The AI Research Garrett turbocharger was set to produce about 9 pounds of boost through an internal wastegate. A specially calibrated Rochester quadrajet carburetor fed the engine, while an electronic spark control system constantly listened for knock and adjusted ignition timing in real time. It was some of the most sophisticated engine management Pontiac had ever installed on a production V8. For everyday driving, the combination worked surprisingly well. Cruising at highway speed, the engine stayed calm. Oil pressure remained steady thanks to its high-pressure 60 psi pump. The turbo barely worked unless extra power was needed. Drivers who treated the car gently often found it dependable, comfortable, and remarkably civilized for an early turbocharged American performance car. But there was a problem. Actually, there were several. The first weakness wasn't inside the engine, it was sitting right on top of it. Unlike modern turbocharged engines that place the turbo low in the exhaust system with sophisticated intercooling and electronic fuel injection, Pontiac's setup mounted the turbocharger high above the engine, close to the carburetor. Every time boost increased, heat built rapidly around the intake system. That hot compressed air was exactly what engineers feared most, because hotter air dramatically increased the chance of detonation. Now imagine the fuel available in 1980. Premium gasoline wasn't what it is today. Octane ratings had fallen compared to the muscle car years, yet Pontiac was asking a low-compression V8 to survive under boost using a draw-through carbureted turbo system. It was walking a tightrope. Every full-throttle run pushed the engine closer to knock. And knock isn't just another engine noise, it's an explosion happening at the wrong time. Instead of the flame front moving smoothly across the combustion chamber, pockets of fuel ignite violently on their own. Pressure spikes slam into the piston crown like a hammer. Those shockwaves travel through the connecting rods, into the crankshaft, and finally into the bearings. Do it once, the engine survives. Do it repeatedly, parts begin to surrender. Pontiac knew this. That's why the electronic spark control constantly listened for those pressure waves. The moment it detected detonation, it immediately pulled ignition timing away. Drivers couldn't even feel it happening most of the time. But every degree of timing removed also meant less power. The engine was literally protecting itself by sacrificing performance. Most people don't realize just how advanced that system was for 1980. Yet even advanced electronics couldn't rewrite physics. If the driver stayed in the throttle long enough, heat continued climbing, cylinder pressure kept increasing, eventually the safety margin disappeared, and then the real nightmare started. The Pontiac 301 Turbo had received stronger pistons than the naturally aspirated version. The block casting itself gained thicker bulkheads, reinforced main bearing webs, larger main cap bolts, a thicker deck surface for better head gasket sealing, rolled crankshaft fillets for improved fatigue resistance, and a fully baffled oil pan designed to keep oil around the pickup during hard acceleration. Engineers clearly knew the turbocharged engine would face far greater loads than the economy-focused 301 ever had. But strengthening components only buys time. It doesn't erase the limits of a lightweight design. The short deck 301 block simply wasn't born with the massive safety margins of Pontiac's legendary 400 or 455. When boost arrived, combustion pressure rose dramatically, every connecting rod stretched slightly, every bearing carried more load, every head gasket fought to keep combustion sealed inside the cylinders. And unlike modern engines with precise electronic fuel injection adjusting dozens of parameters every second, Pontiac still relied on a carburetor. Carburetors are brilliant mechanical devices, but they don't instantly react to changing boost intake temperatures, altitude, or fuel quality the way modern ECUs do. That meant tuning became absolutely critical. A slightly lean mixture, a tank of lower octane fuel, a wastegate adjustment that produced more than factory boost. Any one of those could turn a healthy engine into an expensive rebuild. Some owners couldn't resist. 9 pounds of factory boost sounded conservative, so they adjusted the wastegate. 10 pounds. The turbocharger itself was capable of producing more air. The engine underneath was another story. At higher boost levels, combustion temperatures increased even faster. Ringlands could crack. Pistons could suffer severe damage from repeated detonation. Head gaskets became vulnerable under sustained cylinder pressure. Bearings absorbed loads they were never designed to carry for long periods. What began as a search for a little extra horsepower often ended with an engine sitting silent in a garage, waiting for parts that weren't cheap and weren't easy to find. Then there was another issue few owners understood: turbo coking. Modern turbochargers are usually water-cooled. The Garrett unit on the Pontiac wasn't. It depended entirely on engine oil for both lubrication and cooling. After a hard run, shutting the engine off immediately trapped that oil inside an extremely hot turbocharger. The oil could literally bake into carbon deposits, restricting oil flow and eventually damaging the turbo bearings themselves. Ironically, the engine that could idle peacefully all day actually benefited from idling for a minute after a spirited drive before being shut down. Owners who skipped that simple habit sometimes paid for it later. You can probably guess what happened next. Some drivers blamed Pontiac, others blamed the turbo, many blamed the emissions era itself. But the truth was more complicated, because despite its weaknesses, this wasn't a reckless engineering failure. It was one of Detroit's earliest attempts to build a turbocharged V8 that could satisfy emissions regulations, deliver respectable performance, and survive daily use. The engineers had pushed a modest 301 cubic inch engine into territory it had never been designed to explore. Sometimes it worked brilliantly. Other times, wide-open throttle exposed every compromise hiding beneath the hood. And just when Pontiac thought it had proven turbocharging could save American performance, a new challenge arrived that no amount of engineering could overcome. But then something happened that no engineer at Pontiac could fix. The market changed faster than the technology. By 1981, emissions regulations were becoming even stricter. Fuel injection was beginning to replace carburetors across the industry, offering far more precise control over air, fuel, and ignition. At the same time, General Motors was moving toward shared corporate powertrains, and the traditional Pontiac V8 family was nearing the end of its life. The Turbo 301 had only been in production for the 1980 and 1981 model years, and its future was already in doubt. Ironically, the engine itself wasn't a complete failure. Far from it. Owners who understood it, who kept the boost stock, used premium fuel, maintained the ignition system, and respected its limits, often discovered a surprisingly enjoyable engine. Its peak torque arrived at just 2,800 revolutions per minute in 1980, making the Turbo Trans Am feel stronger in normal street driving than the horsepower numbers suggested. Instead of screaming towards 6,500 revolutions per minute like the muscle cars of the late 1960s, it delivered a broad wave of torque exactly where most people actually drove. But magazines and racers didn't judge engines by how smoothly they cruised. They judged them with the throttle flat on the floor, and that's where the Turbo 301 struggled. Road testers quickly noticed that the engine was extremely sensitive to fuel quality. If premium fuel wasn't truly premium, or if the engine wasn't perfectly tuned, the knock sensor would aggressively pull ignition timing. The result was an engine that sometimes felt fast, and other times felt strangely flat. It wasn't because the turbo had failed, it was because the engine was protecting itself. Every degree of timing removed was another reminder that Pontiac was operating right on the edge of what this lightweight V8 could safely handle. Then came the comparisons. The outgoing 1979 W72 400 cubic inch Trans Am had earned a reputation for raw, old-school muscle. On paper, the Turbo 301 wasn't far behind, debuting with 210 horsepower, while the W72 had been rated at 220, but numbers don't tell the whole story. The older 400 came with a 4-speed manual, deeper rear gearing, and the unmistakable punch of a large displacement V8. The Turbo 301 was sold only with an automatic transmission and a 3.08 rear axle, making it feel less aggressive even though its torque delivery was impressive. And that perception mattered. Sales reflected it. Trans Am production had exploded during the peak of the Smokey and the Bandit era, but by 1981 enthusiasm had cooled dramatically. Buyers knew an all-new third-generation Firebird was coming for 1982, and many chose to wait rather than buy the final version of the second-generation car. Then Pontiac made a decision that quietly ended an era. The Turbo 301 disappeared. When the third-generation Firebird arrived for 1982, the Pontiac-designed V8 was gone. In its place came corporate GM engines that were cheaper to build, easier to standardize, and better suited to the future of electronic fuel injection. After decades of building its own legendary V8s, Pontiac's engine family had reached the end of the road. The Turbo 301 became its final chapter. For years, enthusiasts dismissed it. They called it weak, fragile, a disappointment compared to the 389, the 400, or the mighty 455. But history has a funny way of changing opinions. Today, collectors see something different. They see one of America's earliest production turbocharged V8s. They see an engine that introduced knock sensor technology, electronic spark control, factory wastegate boost regulation, and sophisticated turbo engineering years before those ideas became commonplace. It wasn't perfect. It was simply ahead of its time. And perhaps that's the greatest irony of all. People remember the failures. They remember the cracked pistons, the blown head gaskets, and the stories of engines that couldn't survive endless full-throttle abuse. What they often forget is what Pontiac was trying to accomplish. They took a lightweight economy engine originally designed for fuel savings, reinforced its block, strengthened its internals, lowered the compression ratio to around 7.5:1, added an AI research Garrett turbocharger, an 800 CFM quadrajet, a 60 psi oiling system, and one of the most advanced knock control systems available in an American production car. Then they asked it to carry the performance image of the entire Pontiac brand. That was an enormous burden for just 301 cubic inches. So was it really the V8 that couldn't survive full throttle? Or was it an engine that was simply asked to do a job no economy-based V8 had ever attempted before? Maybe that's why enthusiasts still debate it more than 40 years later. Because the Pontiac 301 Turbo wasn't just another forgotten engine. It was Detroit's bridge between the brutal simplicity of the muscle car era and the turbocharged future that eventually conquered the automotive world. It could idle all day. It could cruise for hundreds of miles. But when boost came in and the throttle hit the floor, every engineering compromise hidden inside that lightweight block was suddenly exposed. And that's exactly what makes its story unforgettable. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Pontiac's most misunderstood engines, let me know in the comments which forgotten V8 we should uncover next. And if you love the engineering, the failures and the hidden stories behind automotive legends, make sure you subscribe because the next engine has an even wilder secret.